Hi. If you're like me, you probably were a little hesitant to get started with extended events, and it took quite a bit for me to actually feel comfortable with them. I saw a really amazing presentation by Aaron Stellato, and I made a commitment to myself to just always use extended events and never pick up Trace or Profiler again. But I found myself falling back into old habits. So today's session is for people like me that were hesitant at first to get going with extended events. So I hope to make this easier for you and get you interested in using them. Always make that the first tool you go to instead of looking at the old tools that are really deprecated. I'm not sure if Microsoft's ever going to get rid of them, but theoretically they might go away at some point. So I'm Kathi Kellenberger, and I'm the editor of Simple Talk at Redgate and co-leader of the data platform WIT group. We have some day-long events as well. We just had a couple of them, got another one coming up. Probably the most important thing to know about me is that I'm a lifelong learner and teacher. And I just love learning new things in technology and just in general, just in life, just love learning. So what in the world are extended events? What are these things? So they're going to be used to capture everything or, things that happen on this server. And you can create your own extended event sessions to capture things that you are interested in watching. So for example, back in the day, whenever I would do a lot of reporting services and integration services work, things weren't looking quite right. I would often, and this is just on a developer instance, I would often bring Profiler up just to capture what statements were coming in from those packages and what the parameters were and why things didn't look right. I just used it a lot for a troubleshooting tool. And it was just so easy to do. It took me quite a while to realize, hey, why don't I just do this with extended events? Well, part of the reason it was difficult is whenever extended events were first out back, and I believe it was 2008, this data was returned in XML, and there was no interface. There was no way to actually do this without writing scripts. So that stopped a whole lot of people. Eventually, Microsoft added an interface in SSMS. I think it was possibly 2008 R2 or 2012, somewhere in there. They added this easy-to-use interface, but a lot of people were still very hesitant. To use extended events, you need a couple of permissions. You need create. If you want to create them, you need alter event session. And if you want to query them, you need view server state. So if you're just messing around with a development instance on your local laptop or whatever, you probably have sysadmin rights in that. But if you are wanting to view these or create a session on another server, you may have to ask permission. And this graphic down here kind of shows what the data looks like as it comes back in the GUI tool. The data is actually returned in XML, and we can query that if we want to set up something automated. So what about Profiler? Why was that so great? Part of the reason we have really relied on this thing is just because there were all these neat little templates in there, and you kind of knew what you might want to look at. It just seemed very intuitive. And I think part of it is just we're just used to something. We don't want to switch to something new. There's some disadvantages to using this. Don't ever pull Profiler up against a production server. That is really, really bad. You can cause a big hit in performance by doing that. However, in the past, we often would bring Profiler up to help us write the trace scripts, and those trace scripts were really difficult. It's just pretty much impossible for someone to do that themselves without the profiler tool. So these are deprecated, right? Even Trace, where everything is scripted, they do have a hit on performance, but also as new features are introduced, Microsoft is not adding any new things into Profiler or Trace. So there's nothing new being added as new features come out, where in extended events, Microsoft always keeps that up to date. There are thousands and thousands of new events. And part of the issue is like figuring out which events to choose. I'll walk you through how to translate some of your old Trace scripts, even if you are not sure of some things, like how to go about that, how we translate from one to the other. So I'll first demo. I just want to show you what X-event is, another term for extended events that you'll hear frequently. So if I'm in SQL Server Management Studio, under Management, I'll find Extended Events, and I think I've got Extended Events, and I've got Sessions. So an extended event will run if you have a session defined, okay? And then you've got to have those turned on. I've got a bunch of them here. This particular instance is not involved with always on, so that one's disabled. I've got some other ones that I've got running, and you can see from the little green arrow instead of the red square. And I keep some of these just up and running or available, maybe not running all the time. Things that I found online, different sessions I found, and I was like, you know what, this is something that I would want to use. So I'll just keep it around just in case. So the one I want to show you is this configuration items changed. I'm not going to drill into the guts of it just yet, but I want to take a look at watching live data. So I used extended events in a demo yesterday, and I started getting error messages about this live data actually being deprecated, and I had not known that, so I'm not sure what's going on there. I'm going to go ahead and run this little script here that just makes a bunch of configuration changes and then changes them back. And hopefully it shows up. So the interesting thing is when you first create an extended event, you'll only get probably the name and the timestamp. You won't see these other columns here, but you will see data here. So it took me quite a while to realize, like, if I wanted to see this piece of information, I could just right click and show the column in the table. So there's some nice features here in the GUI that you may not realize. I mean, I was just going a little crazy trying to look at all of this. I didn't realize I could bring up these extra columns. And there is another section here which you can also come up here and choose the columns as well. So there is a GUI. There is a way to create these, start and stop them, and also view the data. I can view the data in a couple other ways too. Here's one that's an event file. I'm going to right click, and this particular one will, and it's got, I'm going to try to sort it there. There we go. There's today's. This will store the information until the files get rolled over, where viewing that live, that I guess I've already gotten rid of, that will go away once we close that. That just captures it live. Any questions so far?
No,
Not yet? Okay.
Not so far, yep.
Okay, I want to keep going then. All right, so how do we create these? You can right click that sessions folder and run a wizard. But what I found is just saying new extended event session is easy enough. So that's what I'm going to show you. So we have to give it a name, and you might want to set some properties about, do I want this event to always start up when the server starts? Do I want the event to start immediately? Do I want the live data? Do I want causality tracking? So do I want it to group, if I have time, that's part of my bonus material, but do I want it to group things together so I know what happened within a particular transaction, for example? So I could also create a session by scripting it. Chances are you probably won't do this at first. Maybe some of you are really, really great at scripting and might, but if you've ever seen, and I can show it to you really quickly, let me bring that up. If you've ever seen the script for a trace, yeah, this is not intuitive at all. What are all these numbers, right? Very, very difficult to set up a trace script where for an extended event session, it's actually pretty easy. If you're like me, I will use the GUI and then right-click and script things out to get used to what the script looks like, and then maybe make some tweaks, and maybe I'll save this somewhere. I'm not really doing consulting work right now, but probably what I would do is make a folder out in the cloud or maybe on GitHub where I might save my favorite extended event sessions, something like that. So I might script them out. So what do you need to create it? So once we bring that up, and I had shown you that first page where you put the name on, the next thing you need to do is find the events you want to capture. This is one of the hard parts of this, and I will show you in a later demo how to do this. So in this case, what I would like to do is just measure when tempDB grows. Okay, so I know, I can tell you just because I figured this out at one point, that it's database file size change. So I had pulled that event over here. There is, and once you get, let me go back just a second. So then what you do is you press this configure button, and it kind of moves the screen over. It's kind of weird, but that's how it works. And then you can look at these global fields actions. So these are items that are available for any extended event, and you can choose those. Now, if you have more than one action brought over, you could hold the shift key and select for all of them, and then just click and get have these collected for all. You also have to be very careful here. These are actions, okay? Most of the time, the action is collecting data. Collect the application name, collect the host name, collect the process ID. But there are also things like create a mini dump or break the process. So be very careful on this part here. What you cannot do is, for example, send an email or cause a table to be populated or something like that. But there are some workarounds that I'll show you. The next thing that you might want to do is filter. My advice with filtering is try to play around with this. Try to cause the event to happen that you want to capture, maybe in a development environment. I've just found that the filters, at least for me, I've found they have just been a little weird sometimes. So be careful there, because sometimes I think I've got the filter just right and then it doesn't capture anything. So you might have to go and play with those. I also found that the latest version of SSMS works, but a previous version of SSMS would give you error messages if you tried to set a filter. So it was like around 18.7, I think, was what I was using when I had this problem. Upgrading to 18, whatever the latest is, I think it's 18.9 maybe, solve that issue. But just be very careful on filters. So what this will do is keep the collection limited to TempDB. I've always heard that filters in trace filtered after the fact. This filters up front. So that is even better. At least there is still some tiny impact on the server from an extended event. You could actually make an extended event horrible, very terrible, because depending on how much stuff you were collecting. But by adding this filter, you can cause even less of an impact. And finally, there's this event fields tab. So the event fields are the things that are automatically collected for a particular extended event. Notice one of them has a little checkbox. It doesn't automatically collect database name unless you would check that. Okay, so these are specific ones that Microsoft thinks you'd be interested in if you choose this. And finally, you have to define a storage target. It will run without a storage target, which doesn't really make sense. So be sure not to forget that. There are a couple that I use pretty often. One is called ring buffer. That is in memory. It's going to go away. It doesn't necessarily hold that much. And I also, but it's good for querying. If you have a job that you'd like to set up to watch for this event, this event firing, for example, it's more lightweight for querying. Not really great for looking at the data. There's also event file. Event file is really nice for looking at the data and also troubleshooting after the fact. So even if you restart the server, that event file data will still be there. For both of these, I really recommend creating much smaller sizes than the default. Otherwise, you just collect so much data, it's hard to work with. And chances are you're going to want to see something that's somewhat recent anyway. You don't want to collect tons and tons of data in these. So let's go ahead and create an extended event. Hopefully all goes well here. So I'm going to right click and I'm just going to choose new session. I'm going to call it TempDB file growth. Also, I want to point out that those templates that were built into Profiler, they are here as well. So you could actually just choose one of these templates. And I think that's something that folks don't realize exists. I'm not sure when Microsoft added that, but that might be the thing that gets you to break away from Profiler and Trace. I'm going to go ahead and choose my own items, but I'm going to watch, let's do that watch live data. I'm going to go to events and I'm going to choose database file size change and bring it over. I'm going to click configure and I am just going to choose a couple of things here. Let's just choose host name and process ID application. I'm going to filter it. Here's database ID equal to for TempDB. I think that's right. And over on the event fields, I'll go ahead and choose database name. I think unless they've changed it, if you wanted to filter on database name, you would have to choose that item over here. Then I'm going to go over to data storage and I'm going to choose the ring buffer. Again, that's in memory. And I'm just going to keep 100 events, not 1,000, because if I want to use that for querying on a periodic basis, for example, by a scheduled job, I don't want a ton of data there because it will take a lot of effort to query it. And I'm just going to put 5 megs there. and click OK. And let's start that guy. I could have chosen something to start it. So now what I'm going to do is go to the right file here, and I'm going to run some statements that will make TempDB shrink and grow. And I'm going to go over.
Kathy?
Yes?
Quick question. As far as I remember, you said yes. Would you make the templates and the scripts available online?
Yeah, I think they're already available out on my GitHub, and I sent that to the organizers yesterday.
Okay,
I
perfect.
can bring that up before. Here you can see this. Let's see. Oh, I didn't save statement here.
Again, not a problem. I'll take care of the GitHub. If you send me,
Okay.
I'll republish. Thank you.
Okay.
Please continue.
Yeah. All right. So here's my database file size change events happening. And let's see. Let me show this one as well. Notice that sometimes it's a positive number. This is the change. Sometimes it's a negative. So it's actually measuring both growth and shrinking. And also, here's this other one to look at, is automatic. So this is showing whether it's an auto growth or something that I did on purpose. So I had those shrink statements on purpose. Okay, so the other thing I didn't think about when I was doing this, let me go ahead and bring the properties up again, that I didn't think about the event file, the other one I like. These will go to the same folder as your SQL Server error log. I would recommend making it maybe something small, like 50 megabytes, something like that. Don't leave them at that really gigantic size. So that's really how easy it is, but you still may not know how to choose which item, right? Are there any more questions at this point? This is where I would normally stop. Okay, I'm going to take that as a no. All right, so what if I've got my favorite traces that I've used over time? How can I convert those to extended events? So I'm going to show you that next. Let's get rid of this and go back. Oh, did I close? I think I closed the wrong thing. Closed the wrong thing. So let's see if I can get that back. Here we go. All right. So Microsoft has provided some DMVs to help you figure it out. So combining, and there's really a methodology that they outlined. So I took that, I made some tweaks, but this is pretty much from this document that they have out there. First of all, look at the trace. If you have the traces running, run that to figure out which one. So this is the default trace, number one. Number two, I actually have one out there measuring TempDB growth. That was that trace I showed you earlier, okay? And once I have that number, number two, I can run this to see, you know, what the event IDs are that I'm using. Now, if I have this file, I can just pull these numbers right out. That's the important thing, these numbers, in this case, 92 and 93. But if I don't have my file, if that trace has just been out there running and I don't have the original script, I can get those event IDs right from here. So in this case, I was just looking for growth, data file growth, and log file growth. So you may be realizing already there is not a one-to-one mapping between trace and extended events. I can also run this on a currently running trace to find out what columns I might be running, might be collecting, okay, and see if they're, just kind of keep track of that. I can also look to see if there are any filters, which the filter query is not quite as useful, and I'll show you why in just a second. Because it tells me the event, it tells me what I'm filtering on, database ID, and equal to, but this logical operator column is not really useful. It's telling me no, like let's say I had multiple items for number 2. It'll have a 1 here if I'm using and or if it has a 0 here if I'm not using a logical operator. So it doesn't tell you whether it's and or. So hopefully you remember, this particular query will show the mapping between the two, and also, so like here's the trace event ID and the event class. Here's the extended event name. So that's where I got that database file size change. And what's really interesting here is I've actually got a few more, 92, 93, 94, 95. If I look, all of those, it's log and data file, auto and on purpose, shrinking, right? Or are these all auto grow? Auto grow, auto, these are all mapped to data file size change. This is whether it was automatically or not. And then it shows you some of these trace columns that you might have collected and the extended event action, like if you want to pull in those extra items. But some of these are things that you would have already pulled in anyway, like database ID. So that's what that particular one does, which is really useful. Yes.
Kathi?
Yes.
There is a question from Mark. Have you seen any performance impacts when you hit the max file size? We saw some massive performance impacts with Query Store when it hit the storage limit and tried to clear out the old data.
What I really do, I'm not sure about Query Store, but with these, I try to keep them really small. So that, and if I want to clear out old data, really what I would have to do is just like there's like 4 or 5 files, I can just go and delete the files. I have seen some issues where I had a lot of stuff on the screen and it just crashing SSMS when I would try to filter. So I try to keep everything really small as far as this, and I can't really compare it to Query Store though. Okay.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, just keep everything tiny. And unfortunately, the defaults are pretty big. Okay, so this is how I would do this mapping. If I know especially if I know these numbers, I can use this query and I can find out, what it is I need to know. And really, this is the most important part. Okay, I am going to go back to the slides. Looks like I got about a half hour left. What if I would like to be alerted if something fires? I had a customer that had a problem somewhere. They couldn't find it, where TempDB would just go crazy and fill up the drive like once a month. And I knew I could capture that with extended events, but I really wasn't sure how to alert them. So I ended up doing something with Service Broker to actually alert them. And so, if I had known what I know today, it could have been so much simpler. So what you can do is query the XML part and then set up an agent job to send you an alert. Okay, so let's take a look at what that looks like. So one thing I didn't show you was how this ring buffer looks. Okay, so this ring buffer comes back as XML. That's not really useful for troubleshooting. However, this is the most lightweight piece. Again, keep it really small. The default is 1,000 events. Keep it 100. You know, keep it tiny. And that way you can have a job go out and query this. When it queries this XML, it's actually looking at everything. You don't want it to have to look at 1,000 things, especially if most of those were, you know, well in the past. So keep it really small. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the query that is used for this. But, and I wouldn't expect you to write this query, but it is available. Lots of people have posted this query. So all you have to do is put in the name of your extended event session, and let's make sure that I've got it exactly right. Nope, I don't. File growth. And also, how far back in time do you want it to go? In this case, it's going back 60 minutes, okay? Because I don't really care about TempDB growth. I don't want to be alerted on things that happened yesterday or 10 hours ago. All right, so I'm going to run, and it just comes back with a count. All right, and that's all you really need to know about this query. You can grab it from the code on GitHub that I put out there. So it found 100. I think it found 100 because I had limited my extended event file to 100. There were actually more gross than that. And that didn't take long to run. Trust me, if you have a lot of data to query, this thing is going to get slower and slower and slower. That's why I like to keep it small. So what I could do then is use that in a SQL agent job. So what I did here, I think this query is a little bit different. This was the original query I found. I rearranged it to make it look a little bit easier to read and understand. I took part of it and I put it in a common table expression, but it's really the same query, just rearranged a bit. And there's reason for that that I'll tell you later. So what I did here, the other difference is I have a variable called count. I'm saving count, the count from the query, and then if the count is over 0, then I raise an error, which causes the job to fail. So here's my job. And there's that same query I just showed you. So I could have this scheduled to run once an hour, whatever I would like to do. Start job, and it should fail. It failed because we did cause TempDB to grow. Okay. Any questions before I go on to the next thing?
So far, no questions. No.
Okay. It is possible to query the XML. I would say if you really are interested in this, make sure you go back and go through the recording again, because it's a little tricky. But look at the ring buffer. That's what we're going to be querying. I'm hearing a bunch of background noise. I'm not sure where it's coming from.
Okay, let me check.
A bunch of static and clicking. So when I look at the ring buffer, the thing we want to query, it looks like this. Okay, so the first thing that I can do if I want to set up my own report or whatever against this, I can use the xquery function called nodes. And what I'm telling it here is that I would like to split this out into individual events. So when I do that, I get results that look like this. They're still XML, but instead of one XML document, now I've got one for each event, okay? If I expand that, it looks like this. I've got events, I've got data name and action name. I've got these different types of things in here. The events next to the brackets, if you're not familiar with XML, and I am, not well versed in XML, but these things are called elements. These top level things, okay, like type, action, are called elements. And these other things are called attributes, or you could think of them kind of like properties. So I can have arrays of elements, and each element could have these attributes. So here's an array of default elements. So these are those things that are automatically captured whenever I try to capture database file size change. And down here, action, these are the things that are that I checked the box that I wanted to collect extra. I'm interested in these other things. In this case, just one, the client host name. Okay, so it always will look like that. Let's say that I want to look at the timestamp. The way I do that is with the value function. In this case, it's at the very top level element, the event. So I can just specify the timestamp. I've got an @ showing that it's an attribute. And I also have to give it a data type. This is a SQL Server data type. What is the best match to SQL Server? Also notice this array element here, this array index. Not for all XML, but for working in this particular situation, always put a 1 here, okay? Inside here, there is only one event. So we're looking at the first one. When we look at the data elements, they will each have a different name. So in this case, I say, I want to start at data. I'm going to tell it which one I'm looking for in this array. This is the one I'm looking for. XML allows multiple items with the same name here. So I'm going to tell it 1, okay? If you're working with other XML, this is not necessarily going to work. It will work with this. And again, I'm going to tell it int. All right, so I'm going to just show you really quickly. Again, if you are interested in that, going deeper in that, go back and watch the recording later. Play it step by step, because I know I did it too quickly for it to really sink in. Okay, so here's one where I have used value to pull these items out. And instead of getting an error count, I'm looking at all these different items. And I might want to do that if oh, nothing's coming back. Let's see. Let's do DB file change. Something that had to fire recently, or it's not going to come back. Okay. It's still not coming back. Let's do this. 30. TempDB, let's look at that. TempDB file growth. All right, we'll get this right, and I'm going to cross my fingers. If it doesn't work this time, I'm giving up and moving on. Yeah, it's taken a while, so it can take a while to go against these, so be really careful with what you do. Hadn't seen it take this long. Might come back to this. Oh, there it is. All right, so you could use this information then to put in stuff in the where clause, for example. So I've pulled out, I didn't put column names here, but I pulled out, you know, whether it's automatic and the amount of change, the file type, data file, and the database ID. So you could pull that information, and what you might do is go ahead and add that to a where clause, for example. Again, this is querying these. Even little small files can cause, can be a hit on performance, so be careful with them. And querying those, if you save them to actual files, that can really cause issues. So what I would suggest in that, I heard someone recently said that they would just move them to another server to query them. Let's see. Another thing I want to show you is I look here. Someone pointed this out to me the other day, that there's this X event profiler showing up down here. These are some standard extended event sessions running. It doesn't look like you can modify them, but you could actually launch the session and then watch it run and collect things. So you could actually do that. The other thing I want to show you is Azure Data Studio. If you go out and add this extension, SQL Server Profiler, to Azure Data Studio, then go to the command palette, launch Profiler, and you can choose from the same two sessions that we just looked at. Okay, so you could look at them there as well. You could filter it, you know, things like that, but you can't, there actually are some other views here. I had noticed that. So you can work with it. You can't create your own sessions though, but it's, see, I guess if we have to start it and then some things show up. Haven't really played with this. I just found out that it was actually there. Any questions?
Let's, I guess, give it 30 seconds.
Okay. I've got a few more things to show you, but I wanted to bring up this resources. That's where you can get the code and slides. Also, if you ever hear any of those three folks talking about extended events, be sure to watch, because they are really the gurus in the community as far as extended events. But I also wanted to talk about a couple of other advanced features here. One of them is, how in the world do you get parameters from stored procedures? So a lot of folks have really struggled to figure out how to get those, and it was so easy in Profiler. So I went out and tried to figure it out about a year ago, and of course I ran across an article from Grant, Scary DBA. Most of you probably know him. And so I just want to show you that, how that works. So I've got, you can grab the code for the extended events from Grant's article, easy enough. But let's see, there's management. So I'm going to make sure, what's the name of that? Starred procedure parameter values. Okay, it is running. I'm going to go ahead and watch live data. And I'm going to close some of these other ones. Okay. So I'm going to call a stored procedure You know what? I'm not going to call this one. I'm going to call a different one. I didn't realize, I knew that didn't look quite right. That was something I had gotten from Grant, I think. Here's the one I really wanted to do. And I'll call it another time just to make sure it shows up. Sometimes with the live data, there has to be a buffer, you know, it has to be so much data collected before it shows up. But anyway, I'm going to zoom in here. So there we go. There are my parameters. Okay. And the event he was capturing, it looks like you could get it from SQL statement completed or module end. Looks like the two events that he was collecting. And I got that information from him. The other really cool thing you can do, and this will demonstrate two interesting features. Causality tracking, where we can look at everything that happened for a particular event grouped together, but it'll also give me a chance to show you the grouping feature, which is really nice. I noticed, now I haven't had the problem the past couple of weeks, but the first time I gave this, I couldn't find this causality tracking. It was because the dialogue needed to be expanded. It was kind of goofy. So I would assume that updates to SSMS has fixed that, but I haven't had that problem recently. So let's take a look at that. Again, I have got query behavior extended event. I have got an extended event for this. It is on. Let's take a look at it. And notice that this causality tracking box is checked. Okay. Another thing I didn't really mention is you can modify the data storage while the session is running. But what I've found is if you want to change anything here, you really should stop it and then start it again. So notice that this was actually grayed out. I couldn't change it. This may have changed, you know, just be sure. The other thing is that if I am pulling data from like the event file, if I'm trying to capture something live, I might have to close that up and pull that open again to catch the most recent items. All right, so let's take a look at that. Again, you can get the extended event from Grant's article. He has really done a great, I mean, really all three of those people are just so great at solving problems for the rest of us. And I'm going to run this a few times here. All right. So now I'm going to go back and view the target data. And I'm going to add in, let's see, the activity ID. And let's see, where would be the statement? Here we go. All right, so I've got this new thing called activity ID GUID. So what I can do, and I don't believe this works on live data unless you stop the data feed. It does work on the file. I can go ahead and click this grouping and say, let's say I want to group on the GUID. And is it not? Oh, there it goes. It's just taking a bit. All right, so now I have this all grouped, and I did not have to do anything ahead of time. I'm able to do that on the old data. So what I can do then is expand, and I can see this is actually selecting data from extended events. It's not really what I wanted. That is today. I'm getting a lot of stuff not the one I was interested in. Let me make sure there's no filter on this. There is no filter there. But what I could do is say, let's do this. See if it works. Batch text. Not contains DM E. See if that gets rid of it. Okay, so now let's look. Use wide world importers. Still not getting exactly the ones that I'm looking for. But what I could also do is, I probably should have cleared the data out before I started. I can also do aggregates. So I could say, let's do a count. Or if it's an integer, I could, get an average or whatever. So I can now get counts of each item. Sorry that the thing I was really looking for, I was having trouble finding. Again, here are the resources. I am wondering if there are any questions. I'm really at the end of the material. I feel like I went kind of fast, but is there anything anybody would like me to go over again or any additional questions?
I guess I have the ultimate question of, does the extended events now doing more or less the same thing as the profiler?
More.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, the answer is more. So yes, it's the replacement for profiler. We really should not be using profiler anymore unless we're just, I think Microsoft does have a couple of specific things that it wants with profiler. Like there's certain things where it wants you to capture statements for certain things, maybe data tuning advisor or something like that. But we really shouldn't be using profiler, and it does more. Okay, so there's a lot more to it. We can't really monitor always on availability groups, for example, with profiler, but we can monitor with extended events. So it's definitely the replacement for extended event or for profiler, and it can do much more. And it can do it with better performance. Again, you can do bad things if you're not careful. Always be careful what you're capturing.
Terry
don't capture the
has
statement.
a question.
Yeah.
How long did it take for you to become marginally proficient?
You know what it really took? It took just sitting down with Grant Fritchie. He will do this. If you run into him at an event, and if he's got 10 minutes with you, he would sit down and teach you. So that's really what it was. It was partly making a commitment to only using extended events and sitting down with Grant and saying, you know what, I'm going to do a session based on the stuff I learned from Grant and then some more things that I figured out. So Grant really didn't get into all that XML stuff with me. He showed me kind of how to get around in the GUI. I researched how to do the mapping, but yeah, I mean, really it took, I guess really the real answer is years, okay? Because I just kept avoiding it. Once I started actually saying, yes, I'm going to do this and really started, then it was pretty quick.
Got it, thank you.
Mm-hmm.